It was down to like
close.
2 weeks.
We're used to
I'm
this.
saving my energy.
Sound check yet? Okay, it took that impression.
It's all over.
How long do you want our answers to be? Like, I don't want to. But that's the Terps for you.
July 15th will be remembered here in Turkey as a night of defiance. That night, a section of the Turkish military staged a coup attempt in defiance of the democratically elected government. But the coup was met by the people of Turkey, who were just as defiant in their refusal to back down. There are countless personal stories from that night, and here at TRT World, we have several of our own. Joining me now is one of our senior news presenters, Andrea Sankey. We also have Soraya Salam, the executive producer for Newsmakers. Arabella Monroe is one of our output producers. Mohsen Mogul is an executive producer with the planning department. And Yasin Ekin is a TRT World field producer. And I'm your host, Stavroula Logothetis. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming to the table.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
So, we all experienced that night a year ago. Where were you? And what happened for you? Andrea?
I was in the middle of presenting a live broadcast in which we were really focusing on the attack, the terrorist attack in Nice. So that's where our minds were at. And suddenly I had a producer in my ear saying, Andrea, in the middle of a report, please sign off. So I thought, okay, guys, you don't know what you're doing. You can't just sign off in the middle of a live broadcast or tell me why, tell me what I have to say. And they wouldn't tell me. And the confused producer just said, I don't know, they're just saying that we have to go. So I thought, okay, again, this is probably some silly technical thing that they don't know how to manage properly. We're all kind of new at this. We're just launching the channel. And then suddenly a very panicked floor manager shouted. He said, Andrea, get up, the soldiers are outside. It immediately, my mind defaulted to, oh boy, there's been a terrorist threat and they're evacuating us. So I got out. People were calm though. We knew something was wrong, but it was being managed very calmly, I must say, aside from a few slightly panicked voices. And we get out to the parking lot, and there we see about 15 or so very young soldiers, all armed. They had their guns strapped across their fronts. And remember as well, we have a military installation on this property just down from us, from this office. So we were used to seeing guys in uniform, military, soldiers, walking around, kind of patrolling the area. So again, we're thinking they're there to protect us. There must be some kind of threat. And I felt ironically good about it because they seemed pretty well organized. And so we got into my friend's car, my colleague's car. 4 of us were in there. We realized 2 of them couldn't get home because we were told the bridges were closed. Now that was the first weird sign, you guys remember. A lot of people had been getting pictures on Twitter that this bridge was shut down. There were tanks on the bridge. Still no one knew why. And we were all thinking this is just a terrorist threat. We left, and it wasn't until we were halfway home, and it was funny because my younger colleague had suggested to the driver, do you think this is a military coup? And she said like a mom, oh, you silly girl, that doesn't happen anymore, And within about 3 minutes, we heard on the radio that the military had made an announcement.
How did you feel when you heard that?
Yeah, that's when it hit me. And I remember my Canadian colleague was behind me, and I put my hand behind the car seat, and she grabbed my hand. And we were both thinking, we don't want to leave. We don't want to have to leave. We love Turkey. And it hit us then that if this is what this is about, and we're the first place they came to, TRT World, TRT Broadcasting, they were going to shut us down. And it dawned on us then that that might be what this means.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you?
Well, taking it from there, I mean, I was at home. It was a nice Friday evening. We were expecting some friends. And it was towards between 9 and 10 when actually my guests had started leaving our place, and one of the guests was on his way home back to on the Asian side. Immediately after he crossed it he said, look, you guys be cautious. There's something wrong. The one side of the bridge has been closed down. There's lots of military out. All right, it must be one of the military drills because Turkey was on an alert. There were I think 3 or 4 major terrorist attacks that had taken place across the country by then. So I switch on, my first reaction is to switch on the television and see what's coming on the telly, and I'm switching on to TRT World. And there's a freeze frame. I don't see anything there. And then it suddenly blacks out. So all I can see is the TRT World logo and the ticker running. And then a couple of seconds into this, the ticker stopped running. The scroll at the bottom of the screen stopped running. And it was all black.
What did you feel in that moment?
Something is certainly wrong.
Where were you that night?
I was on the bridge. I spent most of my time on the bridge.
Now, you were on the bridge before this happened, or you went to the bridge after it happened?
I was at home.
You were at home?
I was at home. I got off work, went home, then I got a phone call. My friend was on the bridge. He calls me, "Hey, Yasin, do you know what's going on the bridge?" I'm like, "No." And he says, like, "It's packed. Traffic is it's stopped. No, but nothing is moving. But the other lane is like totally empty. And there's soldiers on the bridge." I'm like, "Soldiers on the bridge?" I'm like, "I'll call you back." Close the phone, start going through Twitter, different social media applications, and then I start coming across a few things. One, the military seized a police precinct just right by the bridge. And then we got news of the rogue jet.
Yeah.
And then we're like, okay, so someone stole the jet, soldiers on the bridge. I'm like, there's a terrorist threat. It was when the president came out and he said, all right, these guys are trying to undermine our government. So just go out and protect your country, protect the democracy you believe in. And then that's when everyone started coming out. Yeah. And what was really, really interesting was just after the president said that, from all around Istanbul, you could hear these calls to prayer, these special prayers that are being called through the minarets, and that was something, it was spiritual, but then it had a really deep meaning to it.
Describe the energy to me that night.
Being journalists, we always we enjoy being in certain situations, particularly,
So sadistic, but it's kind of
it's kind of true. You're seeing history being made, so that was the kind. I was personally getting that bit of thrill,
right?
The adrenaline rush as well. But at the same time, I was feeling sad about what's happening in this country, which we had just arrived barely a few months ago. We had seen, this is a beautiful country, lovely people, and suddenly you're seeing military on the roads, and you're seeing, it looks like things are going to erupt, and there's going to be a lot of violence.
Describe to me how you felt.
As soon as I saw people going out to the streets and the minarets calling people to the streets, I'm like, I'm going to do this. I have a duty as a journalist, but I was like, I'm a Turkish Canadian. I've got dual citizenship. I am Turkish. My background is Turkish. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to witness history. I'm going to change it as well.
Yeah. And for me, that encapsulates the night. Yeah. I mean, honestly, when I heard the news, there was a lot of fear because I was afraid for my colleagues. Mm-hmm. So I was at home with the kids. My sister was visiting with her husband, who's Turkish. And I get a Facebook message from a friend in the States. I heard there's a coup underway in Turkey. Are you okay? I'm like, what? What is she talking about? How do you know this? So I go on Twitter and I see the tweets coming in. I start texting some friends trying to figure out what happened. And sure enough, I hear that our colleagues have been evacuated, and there were coup soldiers that stormed the building. And then when I turned on TRT and the screen went to black, I mean, that was really, that was a really scary moment for me.
Being there, though, and watching our Turkish colleagues, though, that was the most mind-blowing thing. Remember, we had a director there who literally walked up to the only leader of the movement that was there, that was screaming at us. and said, "You can't talk to us like that. My dad works for the police force for 30 years.
This is the thing. I mean,
God, oh my gosh, there was nobody was even nervous.
Yeah.
And then later we actually saw most of our Turkish colleagues come back to our office when the tanks were at our office in the military vehicles,
Yeah.
remember?
Very early in the
Live fire. The soldiers
Yeah.
started firing live rounds, and there were about 100 of our people out there.
Outside.
All they did was duck. As soon as the
Yeah.
live rounds stopped, they stood back up and started chanting, "Soldiers out, soldiers out, soldiers out," as if this were nothing.
When the soldiers were at the building, as you said, very respectful to us, but the person who drove, because I was also there.
Where were you? You were here? At
I was
TRT?
here, but unlike Angia, I was in the newsroom, and we had 2 Pakistani colleagues in that night, and they turned around and they said, "This is a coup."
Really?
Yeah.
they knew.
They
Yeah. I remember they
knew.
told me
They
that
knew.
later. They're like, oh yeah,
They said, and
we're used to that.
but it didn't feel real
Yeah.
then, because we were just seeing these reports. You know, it didn't feel real. So we were kind of joking. You know, it's been nice working with you. And then someone comes over and she says, "The military are here, and we have to leave the building." And then suddenly it wasn't
So funny.
funny
anymore.
anymore. And then an hour later, everyone had gone. and the
I
streets
think
were
that,
empty.
that particular hour was very critical in that I think until then I at least had thought that, okay, this is a coup and it's going to be successful, or I mean, at least the military is going to take control. But that particular call, that particular statement changed it all. That was a very critical moment in that whole night.
What statement?
When you saw the president coming on, which is quite unusual for a president to come on telly
FaceTime.
on,
On
a,
FaceTime,
on
yeah.
a video app. So, but that is what changed it all, and you could physically see. I mean, this was a very tangible transition that you were experiencing. You can hear people out on the streets, running down the stairs. In my neighborhood, which is very, I mean, I've never seen any political activity in my neighborhood. People are very quiet. They keep to themselves. But I suddenly see all these people, and then I realized it was not just the followers of the ruling party, it was everyone across the political lines, across the political divide, no matter what party they were following, no matter what leaders were their favorites or not, everyone was on the streets. That is when actually I could see, as I said earlier, people's power at display. And I think that was the backbone that probably saved it all.
I want to ask you now, the initial shock is over as civilians and your journalist side kicks in. What happened? What did you do? How many of you went out on the street after? I know you went out on the street.
Yeah, it was like a knee-jerk reaction. So Erdogan comes on FaceTime, calls on the Turkish people to come out on the streets, show their support for democracy against this coup attempt. And my brother-in-law, who's Turkish, as I mentioned, he says, "I'm going out." And I think there were some neighbors upstairs who said they're going to go out. I said, "Well, if you're going out, I'm coming with you, and I'm bringing my phone, and I'm going to live stream it."
Hey guys, I'm here again. Let me move the video here. We're at the police headquarters in Istanbul. We've just heard that the Prime Minister of Turkey has said he's willing to take some serious action against the military. Dozens of people out here in support of democracy, in support of the government, following President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's calls to the public to come out and show their support.
And all the while, I'm live streaming this on Facebook. I'm getting comments from friends around the world, especially in the States, saying, telling everyone, share her post, because a lot of the coverage is not correct. Because in the Western media, they were acting like this coup was going to succeed.
Right.
So people were saying,
Yeah.
no, everyone share Soraya's live stream because, look, it's not going to succeed. People are out on the
Exactly.
streets. They're defending their country. And it was truly, as you said, a night of power. And let's not forget, this was the first coup in Turkey streamed in real time. It was the first coup in Turkey that was thwarted by the people.
I was watching what you were doing on the night, and I was on Twitter talking a lot and talking to other people, and it really did make me realize that in any, confusing breaking news situation, the first place you have to be, whether you're looking for information or you're kind of trying to get it out there, is you've really got to use, we talk about it a lot as journalists, but actually using social media and it does make a huge difference to the story, because like you were saying, this might not have happened the same way without it, and so that was really extraordinary to see as well.
The other challenge for me, at least, was that people sending me these messages from across the globe and asking me all the wrong questions, in a sense that they had been given to understand that a coup had already been a success and the government had left the country or was missing, because they were consuming a certain set of media and a certain set of messages and information which was completely not true. Although certain might have wanted that to be true, but it wasn't. So that was another challenge, to make people understand, look, this is what has happened. People are out on the streets and they are in charge of the country.
There's such a lack of understanding as to what the dynamics really are here. I remember a Turkish friend saying to me that what the West never really understood is that, yes, the Turkish public is polarized over the political leadership in this country, as it is in almost every country in the news right
healthy
now,
democracy
including
to
the
have
United
different
States.
opinions,
Yes,
Fair enough.
it is polarized over the current political leadership, but they refuse to really understand how unified the Turkish public is. First of all, just against military coups in general, and also against a movement that the Western press did not want to pay attention to because it was too complicated and complex to deliver to their audiences. But having said that, still nothing was really done to help the Western audiences that ended up looking like they were against Turkey really understand what was happening.
I think that's so well put, because I think it's so indicative that there were rumors that people who were against the government were out on the streets, because they didn't want to believe that it wasn't just government supporters on the streets.
Exactly.
I mean, even in my neighborhood, I spoke to people who weren't supporters per se of the ruling party. They were from all kinds of political stripes, and they're like, but we still believe in our country's democracy, and we're not going to take this lying down. We're not going to allow military dictatorship to come to our country. And the lack of not wanting, to understand that by the Western press, as you're saying, that just shows how much in a bubble, people can be sometimes.
Just before we wrap up, looking back on that night, how have you changed as a person and as a journalist a year later?
I think personally, it's giving me an exposure to understand things firsthand. I think that's where the key lies. I mean, do not look at or have a worldview unless you have seen things. There's a certain discourse that everybody consumes in media. Do not always believe that. There is always an alternative view to the things, and most of the times, that's what you should know. That's what I've learned.
Andrea, what about you?
That's a tough one. Except that, I just think that because so much of the media and the narrative around the world is determined by sometimes people and journalists who have a different understanding of things, that I just look at everything with a critical eye, and that I know that there's nothing out there that can't be questioned, if that makes sense.
Yes, of course.
And I know that, I still know. I mean, I think about right now how people are going to receive this conversation if they weren't in Turkey, or even if they were in Turkey at this time. thinking like, oh, you guys don't really understand, you know, who knows? Who knows?
Or
There's-
maybe, sorry to interrupt you, say, oh, I know why you are saying there because you're living there.
Because
you
you're
know?
living there. This is your employer. You have to say this.
But it's not. That's not what this is about. No, 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 we don't.
And when none of us are in denial that there are not issues in this country that concern us.
Yeah,
Of course
definitely.
there are. Of course there are. We're not fools. But there are issues like this all over the world.
Of course.
All over the world. And we deal with this as humans,
We can.
universally. Yeah. And Turkey is also one of those countries that is, it's complicated. It's politically very complicated. Like you said, you won't understand it unless you live here. And even when you do live here, you still, you know you don't know everything.
Everything.
You know you
Of
don't know
course.
everything.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I think if anything, it's just heightened more critical thinking.
Saraya, what about you?
I would say, yeah, I would say that just approaching particularly stories within Turkey with a more critical eye and realizing that we don't have to have an answer for everything
Yeah.
I like that.
and knowing when to say, I don't know.
I love that.
But let's
Unbelievable.
ask. Let's talk to people. Let's see why, for instance, more than half the country voted to change the constitution. You know, whether or not you like it, I think if anything 2016 taught us with Brexit, with the Trump win, it's that you need to get out of your own preconceived notions about people, get out of your bubble and try to understand the other side.
I love it.
So I think it's definitely made me a better journalist. Yeah.
Eva?
Well, it was my first year of being a professional journalist, and this enormous piece of history happened that I witnessed firsthand. So I think it's probably had a huge effect. It was the first really big story that I was there for, that I was involved in. And I mean, it was very exciting, you know, and it made me realize that I do kind of, you know, that I do really enjoy doing this, and that observing things like that is kind of really important to me. So I suppose it kind of cemented that as well.
Well, that's not a bad thing.
No, it's a really good thing.
Yes, and what about you?
Difficult question. Just like Arabella said, this was also my first year in professional journalism. The coup attempt was the biggest thing I found myself in. So that basically defined, up until now, the rest of my career, and hopefully whatever is left to come, is when you're covering the truth, there really is no truth. It's just a bunch of information, and how we perceive that is really up to the person, but it's a matter of gaining that access. In the end of the day, I think what it's done to shape me is I'm not afraid to get to the truth.
That's very good. It's quite revealing.
Yeah. I very quickly wanted to say, I mean, had this coup not happened, I might not have understood, or at least read about who were the perpetrators of this coup. I would not have read in depth about what FETO is all about and how deeply that organization had penetrated the system, or what you call a parallel state, and how even without, you know, maybe not picking a gun, you can actually terrorize people.
So that's all the time we have. I want to thank you all for taking the time to come to the table, and I wish you continued success. Till next time, from me and the team, thank you for joining us.